This video is going to be about words, nomenclature, and basic descriptions of a specific group of firearms. Now, this is about not the ones that I'm going to be naming, but others that use a similar one. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is it seems to be the one that is used most for making a universal firearm. Now, a universal firearm in my mind, and maybe in yours, would be something that could technically take any cartridge, any bullet, any pressure level, any barrel length, any handle, action, whatever. Now, I'm going to quote something. Combination tools are never as good as specialized ones, but you can buy a $1,000 skeet tube to stick inside of a standard shotgun because snooty people. You can use interchangeable subcaliber full-length liner tubes that are basically the same thing, that are made out of whatever metal pipes you want, and then a liner that's really a rifle barrel or whatever, just to fill in the space so it'll fit a 12-gauge casing or even a 10-gauge, which is a bigger diameter. You can reduce the gauge without using a different gun or a different barrel. But should you have to spend $1,000 per tube? And is it really that much better, or is this snake oil or snake shot? You can read and watch videos on the net, look up subjects about it, and you can look up things that are considered forbidden data, like plans to build a gun. You can do that. And if you're watching this video, you may be looking for that. Now, this is going to be a bit of spoken word photography. I'm going to describe something, and I need you to imagine it in your head, mostly for the purpose of literally education about how guns work. There's a particular type of gun that is called a breech loader. Usually what people imagine is, if you know what it looks like, I'm going to describe it. It seems to break partially in half in the middle, and when it does, it lifts up the barrel's back end, and the front end pops down, and sometimes folds completely in half. It literally looks like you broke a gun in half, which makes them very nice. That's actually a very good design because it's mechanically impossible for it to hurt anybody at that position. And you pull out a shell, or it kicks it out by ejecting it, or pushes it out but doesn't fire it out, called an extractor. I prefer ejection types. And then you put a shell in, and then when you close it, it immediately does everything other than pulling the trigger. It might even set the safety to where when you do that, you can walk around with everything ready to go. All you have to do is push the safety out of the way or do something else, pull on the trigger, and it fires. The reason these are preferred and even sought after is, even though that's a really simple mechanism, you break it in half, a lot like that air gun you bought, that pellet gun you had, it's the same thing. And then you put the thing, close it. That's a break action. Break action, and it also does a bunch of features. I'm going to explain something here in a minute. I'm going to describe it, all of the parts of it that are the last part. But that type of gun, if it's a shotgun, usually just goes and it tips this much. So you can put the shell in. It tips up the exact diameter needed to put the shell in. Others have a door that opens, or the whole barrel slides forward, or part of the action pulls back out of the way as a bolt action. But the ones that let it kick up like that, you can put an unlimited length shotgun shell in there, from 3.5 inches, the longest type that people usually have access to, all the way down to little dinky ones that are literally this long. Why? It's a universal length of cartridge gun. That means you can have a 410 shotgun, which uses a much smaller diameter shotgun shell, that's really long or really short. And you can make these spaghetti long ones that go all the way down in the barrel that are filled with all sorts of random stuff, like literally little arrows. They're legitimately used. They're used for firing a specific type of, used for all sorts of things. These become not a firearm for using for firearms, but for using for firing flares, firing a pin, firing a dart with medication to give to a horse. I'm not kidding. Or some other wild animal. Wild Mustangs are shot with what looks like a little 410 or 12 gauge. It's a syringe gun. It's for giving them medication or inoculations when you can't get near them because they're dangerous. But you still need to inoculate them because you don't want them carrying diseases, for instance. You can use a blowgun for that, but this is easier. Those are driven by air, and when you break action with them, it's just like that air gun. Of course, at that point, it usually uses an air tank. And you can also have ones that use it to do literally paintballs. Paintballs, if you didn't know about it, are almost exactly the same, well, one variety, about the same diameter as a shotgun. So they use a similar barrel. You wouldn't use it for the same reason. The point is, this action and these diameters, both the smaller 410 or even 50 caliber, all the way up to the 75 or 69 caliber diameter 12 gauge shotgun barrels, are used for dozens and dozens of things. Now, why is this mechanism used? It's extremely simple. When you close it back up, in many of the designs, it will cock a hammer back. Most of you already think you know what that is. That will then slam forward and hit a firing pin that may free float and move forward to hit a primer to set off the shell. And it's all activated by a positive intentional behavior on your part. You're responsible for everything that comes out of a firearm by your actions, not your intentions. If you drop a gun on the ground, you loaded it and you dropped it. You're responsible for where the barrel was pointed and who it hit or what it hit. Period. You don't get out of the court with that. It was an accident. We don't care. You can only say it's an accident if you're a senator or something. So what are these combinations? Why am I bringing it up? Pretty simple. Let's say you have a gun where all you have to do is pull the trigger. Most of you are thinking semi-automatics, AR-15s, but let's just talk about it. You pull the trigger. It's a physical action you have to take that is not normally something that can happen to a gun unless a human or something else touches it. Unless there's some bizarre set of circumstances, pulling back on a trigger a specific distance to have it just go off. Now that seems deceptively simple, but here's the process. If I pull back on the trigger like this, let's say the trigger's shaped like this and it has a hinge here. I pull back on it. It's pulling back here. It's pushing this forward. Let's say it was pushing forward and was pushing on the back end of the, let's say, a shotgun shell. And instead of it being an impact-based primer, it was pressure-based. So it had to apply a certain amount of pressure, let's say a certain number of pounds. Let's make it 4 pounds for argument's sake. And it would go off. And it would go off at 4 pounds and then a little above. So I just keep squeezing until it goes off. Now, what if I drop the gun barrel first and this very lightweight metal, but it's stiff, is sitting on the firing pin, is sitting there as a firing pin, on the primer. The impact might drive it forward enough to make it go off. If it's dropped backwards, it might go back into the framework enough to hit that. That would be an unsafe condition, and it was not caused by human intention. It happened because it was dropped. And we need to be responsible for that dropping. So we back the thing off so that we have to push it forward, then apply pressure. Okay, that's good. But now it's backed off. On impact, if it goes nose first, it has to get a running start and hit it. The way you mitigate that is you make the trigger end on this side of the hinge point here heavier so that it pulls it away, not towards it. But we can do better than that. We can make a firing pin that's, say, this long, and it's in a pathway. Okay, and we put a spring on it to push it back so that it takes more than 20 pounds of pressure or whatever to do it on impact, but it only takes a couple of pounds of pressure by pushing on it. How? Because when I pull back on the trigger, instead of it pulling back and pushing onto it, or I snap it really hard to slam it, I'm actually pulling a hammer back. It goes beyond a certain point and releases it, and that hammer carries all the inertia and just enough inertia to hit it, drive the nail, pin, piece of bobby pin, whatever, forward, and under its own inertia, it's away from the hammer, flies forward and hits the firing pin and sets it off. That's why we use impact-based primers. They are a crush-based primer. It has to not only hit it, it has to hit it just right, so that it reduces the likelihood of it going off. Guns, shotguns, pistols, rifles have to be made to a set of standards that requires that you caused it, so you're responsible. If you just drop a gun out of a building, 20 floors, it's not supposed to necessarily go off. They actually have to drop test to 6 feet or something. But there are guns that exist that you can drop them nearly from orbit and they won't go off. They just won't. You have to pull a trigger. And the better ones I've seen are the old cowboy pistols, where if you pull the trigger, it not only enables it to fire, it also starts the whole process of creating all the mechanism's positionings. And if you let go of it at any point before it does that, it just puts everything back the way it was and it won't go off. So if you pull on the trigger and then let go and it doesn't go off, it can't. Some of them even include a metal block that goes in front so that it cannot hit it by accident. Guns have to be designed for these features. Now I'm going to read some stuff. Harrington Richardson, HR. Handy rifles and handy shotguns. And handy pistols, maybe. SB1 was the shotgun receiver, and SB2 was the rifle receiver, supposedly. Now, I'm reading this from other people asking these questions. I'm going to include this just in the audio in the video here. Now, what was that based on? There was a mechanism in that barrel. You notice how the barrel tips up and pops out on this break action. It can also fold in half. Well, why doesn't it just break off? Well, there's a pin holding it. Well, what if there's a metal block back there. What if you cut a notch in it to where you could take the barrel out, put another barrel in, drop it in place, and have it become part of the gun? You'd have it popping out and coming loose, but you could also make it to where it was entrapped at that end. That's what they did with this design. And the design for it was based on a standard design for making an easy takedown shotgun that you could change the barrel out of. You could put a different bore, a different variety. You could even put in any barrel you wanted. So they went ahead and did that along with a couple of other companies, and they made a type of barrel that would do that. One of them is the H&R barrel lug type, and then there's another one that's the TNC, Thompson & Center, quasi-universal guns. They could take any barrel change out. You could do it in the field, rapidly, by literally bending it forward like you would normally, hitting another button to make it go farther, and then popping them loose, put another one and put it back in. This meant that you could change out a barrel, carry extra barrels, use a barrel that's for skeet shooting, and another barrel that's a standard barrel. They're cheaper than these $1,000 insert skeet tubes. You also don't have the hinky behavior of putting an adapter in it. You could make it to where it had the extractor or an ejector in it. You could do all these things that were useful in both of these designs partially. And they all use slightly different variations on the standard, very, very boring shotgun container. There's a sear. It's a sharp bar resting in a notch, bent in a hammer tumbler, in Britain they call it, holding back under the tension of the mainspring. When the trigger is pulled, the sear moves out of its notch, releasing the hammer. That hits or acts as a firing pin to crush the primer to set off the bullet. This primer has to be an extremely unstable material in a tiny amount of it. So it can do a lot of explosion in a tiny space, very controlled by making it really hard to set off, but when it sets off, it's ridiculously explosive, so you use a tiny amount. Amplifier effect. And that allows it to set off the gunpowder or whatever propellant, cordite, doesn't even matter what it is. And it makes it to where it's extremely stable because they're separated from each other by a small amount so they can't chemically react with each other. And they can be built to extremely tight tolerances. Lumps. Large projections on the bottom of and at the breech end of a barrel. They have a slot cut into the lump called a bite. That's for locking it in. The barrel's held in place by a hinge pin to rotate on a knuckle at the front of the barrel, forelug, and it's a semicircular notch, and or called a trunnion, or the BATF or ATF calls it a mounting block, when the whole metal bit is. It goes into a notch, clunks into place, and another notch keeps it from moving out, so you can pop it open, pop it closed, and put it in the shell. A bolt device that engages the top extension to keep the barrels closed is a top bolt. There are underbolts that hold the barrel closed as well. Those are the ones that actually lock it open and closed so that you can go ahead and fire it. Rearward extension straps or tangs to which a buttstock is normally attached behind the action body can also be used for other attachments. You can make this into a pistol grip. The vertical part of the action against which the barrel is held closed is a standing breech face of the action body. These can also be articulated. That's a basic bit of information on how these things work and why they're expandable and trade outable. And there was a court case to decide it was okay to be able to do this stuff in the field. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. Bye.